Today's video has been made possible by my peeps over on Patreon. They are just the best, and to say thank you, I sent out a few care packages last week full of cute little candy and stickers and snacks, so if you'd like to hop in for the next one and get all the other perks that come along with my Patreon, the link is right down in the top line of the description. But welcome back to the channel, guys. Now, last week I said whichever comment got the most thumbs up down in the comment section is the video that I will do for this week. And kind of shockingly, you guys voted for me to do 4 different versions of focaccia bread. Now, I love focaccia bread, that's why I'm more than happy to do this for you guys, and it's not something I've made a whole lot. I've certainly eaten a whole lot of it over the years. If you're unfamiliar, it's just a super simple bread that is baked in a flat pan as opposed to a loaf. It has an insanely high hydration percentage, meaning it's just gonna be a very wet, sticky dough. But the results you get from those gas pockets, you get such a nice chewy consistency. It is perfect for sandwiches. It sucks up butter better than an English muffin, so I'm down with this one. With that all being said, let's get right into it. If you haven't already guessed, we're using recipes from 4 of the best cooking channels here on YouTube: Joshua Weissman, BuzzFeed Tasty, Claire Saffitz, and Binging with Babish. There's definitely some clear favorites here, but let's start with Mr. Joshua Weissman's. I grabbed some whole wheat flour and extra virgin olive oil, bread flour and some warm water, some flaky salt and active dry yeast, za'atar seasoning, and kosher salt. As we kind of get in the groove of all of these different recipes, you're gonna see some very stark similarities, mostly in the ingredients, the method. That's why I really gotta be super precise with every measurement. I'm gonna weigh stuff on my scale whenever I have the opportunity to. And because of all that, the 3 biggest differentiating factors I'm gonna be focusing on here is the hydration percentage, the toppings, and the rise time, because this very first one is gonna get fermented in the fridge for almost 72 hours or 3 days. Now, this guy comes together at first in your stand mixer before getting tossed out onto your countertop and repeatedly slapped down and folded over, which I believe is called autolyse, before it gets whisked away in a heavily greased plastic container and put in the fridge for almost 3 days. That's obviously why I'm doing this recipe first, to get it out of the way. None of the other recipes take this long. So after about 65 hours, I took this out and it had some bubbles, not nearly as many as Joshua did. The oil set up in this weird jelly formation, so I don't know what's going on there. I gave this about 20 minutes to come back to room temp, and it did bubble up a little bit more, so I was a little bit more confident. And if you thought that we could finally bake this thing, you'd be incorrect. Into a greased cookie sheet this went, and it's going to rise fully covered for another 2 to 3 hours. Thank God I've built up a little bit of patience over the years, because if I tried to do this video 3-4 years ago, it would have ended in absolute catastrophe, as I'm sure you all would agree with. But this one's gonna get baked at 500 degrees for about 20 minutes, and it is looking and smelling absolutely fantastic. I haven't even tasted one of these yet, and I could already tell this is gonna be a great day. Look at the crumb on this damn thing. Those like tunnels of little air pockets. It kind of looks like the Avengers going through the quantum realm. There are very few things in this world better than freshly baked bread. The crunch, the chewiness on this, look at the color on both the bottom and the top. I love the seasoning of the za'atar. There's like oregano, there's thyme in there. It's so good. Little bread ASMR for you. This is already one of the best focaccias I've ever eaten, like in my entire life, so the other 3 options, you guys got some more cut out for you. Next up today, we've got Tasty's quick and easy caramelized onion and garlic focaccia bread. You will need some all-purpose flour and kosher salt, some black pepper and rosemary, extra virgin olive oil and warm water, active dry yeast and fresh garlic, ground thyme, a sweet onion, and Parmesan cheese. I think it goes without saying that this one will be the quickest and simplest of them all. It's only gonna rise for about 1 hour and 20 minutes total, which is extremely short for a focaccia bread. It's also got a lot of pretty interesting stuff going on in the dough itself. I've never seen fresh rosemary or ground thyme like infused into the dough, which could be good. Who's to say it's not? In addition, this one doesn't use any kind of fancy mixer. It's all gonna come together in a bowl and then kneaded completely by hand. This was completely unintentional, but I did a really good job at picking two recipes that are on complete different sides of the spectrum right back to back. But even if this one lacks a little bit in the texture or consistency, it's gonna have the flavor because we're caramelizing an entire onion, some garlic, and then it's even gonna get a sprinkling of Parmesan as well. By the time I finished my onions, my dough was ready to be separated into 4 equal rectangles, spread apart a little bit, and then covered once again for its final rise about 25 minutes at room temp. I don't even have to bake these to know that it's not going to be anywhere near that interior bubbliness of Joshua's, but it might still be good, or edible at least. So I dimpled up the dough, I gave it one last drizzling of the olive oil, and then topped it off with my onion and garlic mixture and a sprinkling of cheese. This version is going to get baked in a 450-degree oven for about 22 minutes, and I don't really know what to make of these. In the video, they cut them like Olive Garden breadsticks, so I did the same, and I guess it's time to give them a shot. Before I just pull these out of the oven, my whole family was asking if I was burning something. I can only assume it's the onions. I just hope they don't taste super burnt. Jesus. I definitely wouldn't have said that this was good if I just ate this on its own, but being behind Joshua's, it sets it up so much worse. It's like one of those things you'd make as a kid and think is really good, because it's just so damn dry and dense. Like, technically it's bread, but it kind of resembles the texture of like a really shitty old Red Lobster biscuit. The flavor's okay. I like the onions, the garlic, the Parmesan, the rosemary. Like, it doesn't taste bad, but it's definitely not something I would seek to eat more of. Third on the itinerary is Claire Saffitz's soft and crispy focaccia. I've been dying to do another Claire recipe. Hers were some of my favorite to reproduce until a certain shit channel messed that all up. Claire has her own channel now. Go subscribe to it. It's down in the description. But to make her version, I grabbed some bread flour and kosher salt, some flaky salt and active dry yeast, some more olive oil, some water, and then optionally fresh rosemary and garlic for the top. I know I've said this a few times in the past, but it bears repeating, especially today. My house resembles a literal walk-in freezer if you've ever worked in a restaurant. Unless it's like below 0, we normally have a door or window open. The heat never goes above 60. So every time one of these recipes calls for a certain time to rise at room temperature, I usually double it, or at least let it go for 1.5 times the amount of time they say. Because as Claire says, the rising times and even the baking times is more of a suggestion. You gotta kind of use your eyes and your common sense, unlike a certain shit YouTube channel, and try to like piece together when each stage is complete. You can use the eye test to make sure that the dough has doubled in size. You can use the little poke test to make sure it springs back about halfway. With that all being mentioned though, I know focaccia is supposed to be a wetter dough, but I have never in my life made a bread dough this saturated. It's closer to like a thick pancake batter. I measured all this out super carefully. I know my scale is calibrated because I checked it with like weights and other stuff, so I'm just following the recipe here. It's nuts how wet this still was, even after that first rise, after another almost 18 minutes of mixing. It's literally like pouring out a cake mix. Now this version's the only one that rests and rises 3 separate times. Combined, they're not nearly the duration of Joshua's, but it's something to note. In the meantime, I whipped together my olive oil topping with some freshly sliced garlic, some chopped up rosemary. Deep down, I'm kind of hoping this combines the flavor profile of Tasty's with the texture and chewiness of Joshua's, because that would be a pretty perfect marriage. Unlike common human decency and a certain shitty YouTube channel. I'm sorry, I'm done now. I topped it off with a bit of flaky salt, and I baked it at 450 degrees for 20 minutes on the very bottom rack, and then took it out and finished it on the very top rack for another 5 minutes. According to Claire, this is gonna get a nice crusty brown on both the top and the bottom of our focaccia bread. But I finally got myself a piece, and it is time to try recipe number 3. This looks pretty good. If I just made this alone, I'd be pretty happy with it. It does look a little bit like a yellow cake, but I don't know. So this one has a pretty solid texture. I don't know if it compares to the first one so much, but it's very good. The thing I was worried about, and I was correct, is the garlic. I do not love how bitter and like unpleasant, please focus, black, very deeply fried pieces of garlic taste. It leaves a kind of a bitter aftertaste in your mouth. I almost wish there was a way to steep some fresh garlic in butter or oil and then kind of brush it on afterwards, after it's fully cooked, like some pizzeria chains do. So that way there's no chance of it burning, because you'd still get all that garlic flavor, but not the bitterness. I just want to make sure here, hold on. So this is Josh, this is Claire. You can see how much more well-defined those bubbles are. It's just such a chewier, like crispier texture. And even the bottoms. I know we went through that extra little step of putting it on the bottom and the top to get color, but I didn't move Josh's at all, and that was the color I got there. So Josh is definitely still winning so far, and it's not as close as I was hoping it would be. Last but not least today is the homie Andrew Ray, aka Binging with Babish, and for his you will need... Actually, do I even need to list these out anymore? It's the same ingredients, just a fourth time. All except the white sugar, actually, that he uses a little sprinkling of to get that yeast super active and bubbling up to make sure it's not dead before you dump it into your bowl with everything else. I classify this version as middle of the road as you can possibly get. There's no extra additives, toppings, flavorings, no herbs. It gets the standard treatment of 2 rises, the first time in a bowl for about 2 hours at room temp, and then fully fleshed out in the pan overnight for anywhere between 12 and 14 hours. Now that we're approaching the end of this one, I can be honest and say that as much as I love bread, I'm not gonna wanna see it or smell it or eat it for a couple months. There's nothing quite like making and consuming and smelling the same exact food item for like 4.5 days straight. The only major thing I'll point out with this one is that Babish says to bake at 450 degrees for 30 minutes. Do not do that. I pulled mine out right about 21 minutes. It's looking plenty golden brown. If you went 30, there's no doubt it would have been burnt. But now it is time to stuff our face with the very last slab of salty, oily carbs of the day. When I think of focaccia bread, this is definitely what I think of. This is probably the closest to what you'd get from an Italian restaurant, from the bakery. So right away, I kind of love the purity of this, where the bread shines through. You know, you get the olive oil, the saltiness on the back end, but it's really about the bread. The thyme, the rosemary, the garlic, I feel like that's good in theory, and some people who love those flavors might love that. But for me, I kind of just love something that's like a blank canvas. It can be eaten and appreciated fresh, but after like a couple hours or a day, this is what I would want to make a sandwich with. It's got a good crumb, it's got a great chew. This is cooked perfectly though. Maybe 1 or 2 extra minutes, but definitely don't go the full 30 that Babish says. It's got a little bit darker of a color than Claire's bottom. It's about the same on top. I can easily say that Tasty's in 4th, unfortunately. Joshua's definitely the winner. I mean, nothing compares to that outer crunch, the texture all the way through. These two were really hard, but I might have to use the cop-out of the bitter garlic and rosemary on this. If it wasn't for that, I might have to put them as joint second because it's really that close. But for now, this is your list. I hope you guys enjoyed today's marathon of a video. If you did, leave me a big old like. Again, let me know what you'd like to see next week down in the comments. Follow me over on Twitter and Instagram if you do not already. Other than that, have a fantastic weekend, and I will see you right back here next time. Peace.
With the M without the AD. Flipping burgers and my money super lazy. Try and make a meal tonight, they ain't paying me. Try and supersize my life with my 18. Yeah, our style wasn't wavy, but we had a vision.